co-chair along with my colleague Prue Tyler of Empower Women. So for those that don't know, Empower Women is a result of the merger of Women and Super into the Financial Services Council early this year, and we're delighted to have you all here today. I mean, the turnout was just very heartwarming, and on behalf of FSC and Funds, we welcome you here. This is the first of 3 events in our inaugural Leading Success Leadership Series. For Empower Women, we're really excited about this collab, our ability to lead this collab, first between FSC and Funds, and we hope the first of many, coming together to move forward stronger together. And I think that's what today is all about, is through each leadership event we look to inspire more women into leadership. We will then look to discuss and understand and look to break down some of the barriers with the leaders in respect of getting women into leadership. And our final event, number 2 and number 3 next year, will be around the importance of our male allies and the importance of growing our male allyship. So we hope that you will all play a part in all of these events, which are really, really important. And as Kate said, particularly after the result of last night. I think, despite the progress that has been made, we are still not there yet. There's still being more executives on NZX listed companies named marked than women. And if you look at McKinsey's annual Women in the Workforce report, the largest study of women in corporate America, it will take 48 years for the representation of white women and women of colour in senior leadership to reflect their share of the population. Now, that being true parity for women. Now, are we any different here in New Zealand? I don't think so. So, we've got some action to undertake. Global Women's recent Champions of Change report showed that while there has been progress, the gender balance at executive level has been slow, with management representation of women the slowest area of sustained change. Their aim in focusing on what they refer to as the gender power gap for their members being to have board, executive and management roles held by at least 40% of women. And as we've seen from the Champions of Change program, with action and accountability, there can be change. So that's really what our leadership series is all about. We're not here for a talk fest, we're here to involve you all and to get change. So I thank all of those who have got us to where we are today in supporting this collaboration, particularly the CEOs, Kirk and Jim of FSC and Infants and their boards. I think this really is an important initiative, and coming back to that, coming together to move forward stronger together. I really do believe that that's the answer. So I hope you enjoy the session today and the conversation with these spectacular panellists that we're going to hear from today. And then our call to action, of course, there is always a call to action, is that after this, that you'll join us, you'll join Empower Women in this ongoing collaboration between FSC and Infants in looking to be the change and to be part of that change. This session, this event series is, for you, and we can only do it with you. And to quote, I think appropriately at this point of time, to quote Kamala Harris, to engage for the future that we all know that we can build together. So on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Tracey number 1, Tracey Walker, the Head of Institutional Banking at Westpac, who is also an Infants board member. So thank you, Tracey.
Cool. So hi everyone. It is a great turnout. So thanks for all being here. Thanks Kate and Minters for hosting the event today. I'm going to quickly introduce our panellists because we did have a surprise panellist on the end there, and then we'll jump straight into the questions. What we'll do is I've got specific questions for each panellist, but I do sort of encourage you, if you've got some kind of reflections on anyone else's question, just to kind of, give us your thoughts and views. So without further ado, I'm going to start, just because this is the order on my run sheet, even though they didn't sit quite where they should have. Now I realise, as in the middle here we have Juliet Tainui-Hernandez, who is a non-executive director of both ASB Bank and Tahu Holdings, and previously the Assistant Governor and General Manager, this is a mouthful, this title, General Manager of Transformation, Innovation, People and Culture at Te Pūtea Matua, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. So before joining ASB and the Reserve Bank, Juliet is, well, where we say, sorry, I've lost my place. Juliet is from Ngāi Tahu and Whakatohea descent and has worked with local iwi and with a large New Zealand law firm before she moved roles in Australia and in Hong Kong and the UK in roles that covered litigation, risk, compliance, strategy, business transformation, people management, and in more recent years, many aspects associated with integration, expansion, and the combinations of international legal practices. Wow, that's very impressive. Ginny Openshaw, thanks Ginny for sort of joining us fairly last minute. Ginny joined ANZ in 2009 and has remained in the institutional division during this time. She heads up a relationship team, which is a sales team covering New Zealand's largest businesses, and also leads the corporate finance function. Ginny joined ANZ from Barclays Capital, where she was in the institutional sales team in Sydney, and prior to that, the CDO structuring team in London. And then last but not least, Natalie Ferguson is a seasoned entrepreneur and co-founder of the investment platform Hatch. By tackling barriers to participation, she helped almost 200,000 New Zealanders to rewrite their financial stories. After a successful exit, Natalie co-founded Powrsuit, a career accelerator for women of every level, combining bite-sized learning and micro-networking. Powrsuit takes professional development out of to-do lists and into weekly routines. I've just signed up, and I definitely would encourage everyone else to do the same. It's very, very, very cool. Right, so here we go. Juliet, I'm going to start with you. So as I did a little bit of research on Juliet, and she is a super impressive lady, you spent 2 decades offshore. So while you were offshore, did you sort of nurture your New Zealand networks? And if not, how did you sort of land back and sort of get such great roles, and was it hard? So what was sort of the thinking and planning around that?
So look, being Ngai Tahu, you can actually never totally disconnect. So no matter where in the world you are, there's always that kind of connection. So I think I could have been away 50 years and there would still be a welcome back on that. The business networks, on the other hand, were a bit different. So I think, I left here in 2001 to go to Australia and then further afield. So the young lawyers that were at the time are all partners of the law firms now. So that's actually also been quite helpful in terms of just helping me to connect back. And then I think I've just taken advantage really of something that's wonderful about New Zealand, which is anyone will have a cup of coffee with you. So I have literally just, I've had, a few hundred coffees probably on my re-entry back 4 years ago, and still building those kind of relationships and networks. So not by design particularly, but a bit of luck and a bit of just general whanaungatanga connection.
Good old-fashioned networking.
Yeah.
Okay, Ginny, so you're in the midst of transitioning into a slightly more senior role than you'd had previously. What are some of the unexpected challenges you've faced?
Yeah, I guess there are 2 things in particular I was thinking about. One is you suddenly become, in a new role, the leader of your peers. So suddenly you're in a peer group, 1 minute, and the next minute you are actually the leader. So that is one of the more challenging things, and I think it's possibly harder for females as well, because it doesn't come naturally to want to sort of establish authority, but you have to, and I think that's a big learning for me, is you have to sort of change the relationships with your team that you were peers with, and now you are actually their leader or their boss, and trying to sort of establish those relationships and make sure that you've got, I guess, a good balance of, keeping up the collegial atmosphere, but also having to set new boundaries. So that's quite a big learning as a I guess, a new boss. The other thing I was thinking about was, it's just about, you do lose a bit of control. So, you had a smaller team before, maybe it was just, 3 or 4 or 5. Suddenly you get a much bigger team, it's 40, 50 people. And what you have to learn is that you can't control all of that. So you have to learn to delegate, trust others that they will do what they say they will do, but you can't control every aspect of every person within that team. So it's about letting go a bit as well.
Okay, and Natalie, as I researched you, and I do encourage people to look up and have a little play around Powrsuit. And Hatch, I'm sure everyone here in the Financial Services Council had heard of Hatch. So what gave you the confidence to try your own ideas? And where have you found your self-belief, or how have you harnessed that?
Firstly, I never try my own ideas. I'm not a big believer in ideas. I'm a big believer in solving problems. So I don't know, I'm really nosy, I'm really curious, and there are so many big problems to solve in the world. And I think with Hatch, it was very much around, look how much money we left in our bank accounts here, and look how few of us were engaging with our money and actively taking control of it to build the lives we wanted. That's a big problem. And so the idea or the solution really just comes out of that. So for me, it's very much, I just get really obsessed with problems and then try and solve them. And same with Powrsuit. Gender leadership gap is a massive, massive problem for the global economy. It is estimated to cost somewhere like $7 trillion a year. The underutilization of women in the workforce also holds all of us back. So I want to solve that.
I love it. Now, I am going to sort of ask Juliet and Ginny, have you got any observations around that? Your time offshore, your time here, you know, how have you found that sort of issue?
Well, yeah, obviously it's been an issue too. I think I've watched some awesome things while I was in the UK. So things like the 30% Club, which is Helena Morris, the amazing woman financier who decided she was going to have a crack at kind of solve this through building male allyship and getting our companies to commit to 30% women. So looking at some of those things offshore and thinking we could do that here, and thinking about how do you apply some of the great things that were happening offshore to apply here too. And I think the benefit of New Zealand is it's actually smaller, so there were fewer people to shift. So we should be able to do it.
Nice.
Do you want me to? Oh no, I'll just quickly say I think I came back to New Zealand about sort of 13, 14 years ago, and I think New Zealand is a lot further forward than some of, I guess in the UK, the banks that I worked at were very old school, which in a big trading floor, it was very male dominated. Coming back to New Zealand was just a breath of fresh air actually. There's a lot more flexibility, a lot more family, friendly focus, and the emphasis on, EDI now through all organisations here is, I think we're vastly more advanced than the UK.
Excellent. Now, to flip back to you, Juliet, what I was really curious about, and I'm sure this will resonate with a lot of the people here today, you've gone as, you were a lawyer, very technical role, and then you sort of, feels like when I read your CV that you transitioned into senior leadership quite quickly and quite effortlessly. Was that the case? And, how does that happen? And how do you...
Quickly, yes, I think so, looking back on it as well. Effortlessly, I'm not sure. I'm a real opportunist and really curious. And when I saw the question, I thought that just kind of took me back 20 years, really. And I think at the time, I was working for Clifford Chance, and my team would do quite often secondments to New York or to Hong Kong, and so I just thought quite like a bit of that. I really like travelling. I asked the leader at the top, really, if one of these comes up, I'm interested. And then, basically the next month, the head of compliance in the Hong Kong office looking after the Asian officers resigned, and so there was this role. So I think because I'd indicated interest ahead of times, I probably wouldn't have applied for that role if I'd seen it, because I would have thought, oh no, I'm kind of too young, maybe not as experienced, someone else might be better. But actually, because I'd already done that, she came to me to say, we've got this role, we think you can do it, and to go for it. So, so I tend to just jump in feet first and worry about the risk around that later. But it served me well, because actually you can do more than you think you can quite often, and pushing yourself out into uncomfortable zones, definitely where learning happens. And so I've probably done that my whole career. Just get a bit bored after say 3 or 5 years and go, what else could I do? So we'll quite often look at what could I do that's available within the organisation I'm in that's a little bit adjacent to what I'm
doing. So it's still that self-belief that you can do it, even if you don't potentially have all the skills needed for the new role.
Yeah, I think so. And de-risking, because lawyer by kind of training. So, you know, it's all the reading, read voraciously, talk to people who are doing it, think about actually what are the transferable skills, and invariably when you sit down and just work through that, you've got more than you think. I'm still petrified when I kind of make the jump into something big. You know, going into the Reserve Bank straight off, coming back into New Zealand after 20 years was a risk, but I thought I'm just going to go for it and just give it everything I've got, and you know, what's the worst that can happen?
And you've done all right, so you know it hasn't been bad at all. And then I'm kind of interested, Natalie, for you, obviously as a founder of companies, they're your babies. How does that leadership differ? You know, how do you bring people on your vision? And is it harder when it's your baby than when you're sort of managing something for someone else? Like you know, how do you get people to follow you?
I actually think the same principles apply. I think getting people to follow you is actually more about them than you. It's about really getting curious about other people's motivations. And I think in our daily lives, we probably see a bit of that. Like you're interacting with different stakeholders, your manager, whoever else it is. And if you actually understand what they want out of the thing, which isn't always obvious, like you might be delivering a piece of work for the organization, there's specific organization goals, but your manager might actually be more interested in how they're perceived, or that they want to achieve a certain thing, or they want to learn a certain thing. Learning how to deliver and tie your goals to that goal is, in my experience, one of the easiest ways to do that. So let's say with Powrsuit, we want to close the gender leadership gap. We're going to close the gender leadership gap. We don't have 40 years. I don't want to be retired and thinking about this anymore. And so that's what we care about. But I talk about it as a Trojan horse, because when you go into organizations, I mean, they care, but it's not top priority in this environment, economic environment particularly. What do they care about? Retention and performance. What we can show through Powrsuit is retention and performance improvements. So we can tie our goal to their motivation. And then when we talk to individual women, I mean, yeah, retention and performance is important, but actually what's important to us is the ability to succeed in our careers on our terms, not having to change who we are, not having to wipe ourselves out trying to do everything. So that's how we start to talk about Powrsuit when we're talking to our members, that all you need to do is focus on yourself and achieve whatever you want to achieve. And by default, if we reduce some of those barriers to helping you get there, more women will rise to the top. And the same goes for performance and retention with organizations. By removing those same barriers, they will achieve more of that, and then we can achieve our goal. So yeah, I feel like it's always about just finding out what the other person wants and tying your goal to theirs.
Love it. No, that's really good. And then, I mean, this is a question that a lot of us have to deal with, and, you know, I don't think anyone's got the perfect answer, but it's always worth asking, you know, and I'll start with you, Ginny. How have you sort of balanced leadership responsibilities, you know, as well as being a parent to busy children? How do they work together? How do you make that work?
Yeah, and I think it's sort of different at different stages of kids. Like I've got two just teenagers now, so they've got emotional needs, whereas they were younger, it was more just keeping them alive type of needs. And so, so now I don't know which is worse, to be honest. But I think a couple of things, you know, is that I sort of accept that I've got two jobs, is how I think about it. I've got a job at home and I've got a job at work. You never feel like you're quite doing 100% in either, so you just have to accept that and move on. But I just think you have to be very organised and vigilant about your day. And what I was thinking is that I still want to fit everything in, whether it's family and work, but I'm very focused at work and I forget about home. When I'm at home, I forget about work. So I think I actually do that quite well. I just do switch off on both sides, which I think is important. And just making sure that you can fit things into your day that work for you. So I was thinking, taking my daughter to netball, what I will do is that, it's half an hour there, I'll schedule a call with a colleague on my way there. Like my kids actually know all my work colleagues now because they listen into calls. And then often there's a,
not breaking confidentiality.
No, I think they're, but, hopefully, yeah. And then, they've got half an hour of practice. So then I organise a call with a customer, and then I have done an hour's work actually on my way just to watch her play a game of netball. So I sort of think, look, that's actually a really good hour's, I've actually worked for that hour, even though I've made my way over to Blimmin St John's, wherever it is, the hellhole it is over there, and you can watch some netball. So it's, I mean, the netball courts. I mean, the netball courts it's this windswept, barren place. So, it's about just fitting these things into your day that work, You're just going to be really organised, and I feel that, you sort of use every minute of your day and then you can fit everything in.
Juliet?
I agree on the different kind of stages, and I think there was an awesome woman I worked with in one of my roles in the UK who was, who had kids probably 10 years before me, so she was a fountain of great advice, and she was like, get a nanny. And outsource the help that you can. Don't do the cleaning, don't do all of those things if you can manage it. Just get rid of the stuff that doesn't matter that anyone can do, so that you've got the things that are really important, whether that's in your work life or at home.
I always find that one quite hard, and I found it hard, and I've spoken to women in my organisation who've got younger children. It's the time you need the most money. You're actually not getting paid the most money. Then when you need the cleaner and the nanny and everything else, you can't really afford it. So,
but it's a short time, and I think that's what my colleague had said to me, is that look, it's hard at the moment, but it will pass and turns into different challenges. But maybe I've got a story for when I had my first child. Was working for a law firm in a really busy role involving quite a bit of international travel, and when I came back from maternity leave, the managing partner sat me down and said, well, we thought that probably now that you've got a child, you won't want to do the international work, so we could give that to someone else so that you could focus on the work at home. And I thought, like, over my dead body, that's the most fun work. I'm going to just defiantly work out how to make this work. So I was having to go to the Middle East quite often, and I had a friend that I'd worked with in New Zealand who lived there, so I rang her up and said, got any ideas? Could I pay your nanny to look after my son so that I can bring him? And so I did that for a couple of years.
Nice.
So I think creativity in solving some of these issues and knowing it's only going to be for a small amount of time.
Nice. And, obviously you, coming to you, Natalie, you started Hatch, but have you always sort of forged your own path? So what was sort of the journey there from more traditional type roles to where you find yourself now?
I've never had a job. Actually, I did for about 6 months when Hatch was acquired, and I lasted 6 months. No, I actually have always forged my own path, and it was only the other day, and I think we all do, by the way. I think everyone does, and there's just some examples that are more stark, and I think even just listening to both of you talking about children, I was a single woman without children until very recently, and it was only when my girlfriend moved in that I was like, oh my goodness, the single tax is real. Like, I was trying to figure out how to clean my gutters and like all of the stuff you have to do, and you're like, it does fill up time. Not the same as children, but it does fill up time. But when I started out, I started straight out of university actually. I hated computers. I never got them. And then I suddenly realized back in the days of Web 2.0, the turn of the century, that they were a great tool for communication. So I set up my own, I wouldn't even know if I could call it a blog, but I learned how to code a website so I could start writing. I loved writing. So I started doing that, and then I got really interested in design. My mum's an artist, so I was like, oh, this is quite fun. So I'd design logos and bits and bobs and just learnt by doing. And then it was only about 2 weeks ago I bumped into a bunch of the people who I started my first startup with. And we were standing around in a circle and ended up, of course, anyone in finance should know this, only about 2% of VC money goes to female founders. And one of the people in this first startup, he was like, we could have, qualified for a lot of those female founder grants. And I was like, how? And he's like, well, you're a woman. And it was so funny that back then, I don't even know if there were any other women. I just genuinely, I now realize how unsupported I was and how many of the situations I was put into and knocked my confidence and I blamed myself for were all things that were completely outside my control. It was being the first and only in a wildly male-dominated, very cutthroat, fast-paced environment. Somehow I survived, and I feel like that's kind of the key thing is often the failures and the hardships, as awful as they are, if you can learn something from them, I don't know, you just end up building resilience along the way, and then you kind of start to back yourself even more because you're like, I overcame that and I overcame that. I mean, it's sort of what you were saying. You just start to go, oh, I can overcome this too, and I'll figure it out along the way because you know that you can.
Yeah. But I think, you know, and I excuse all the men in the room, but there's that idea, and I don't think if you've come across it, but the idea that women overthink situations or exchanges, you know, more often, you know, quite a bit more into more depth than a man would just sort of move past it, where a woman would just sit there and think about the conversation. Is that true, or is that? Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
At least for me.
All right, and Juliet, so can you discuss, and I know I'm going to come back to Natalie last, I'm sure she'll have some great advice on this one, but can you discuss a time when an awkward conversation did not necessarily advance your position, but made things easier for people coming after you?
Quite a few of these, actually, because I'm not very good at keeping my mouth shut if I don't see something I think is unethical or actually just not fair. So, yeah, I've had a few conversations where I thought, don't like something that someone said, which might be sexist or racist or something, and perhaps I'm not aware of it, but it's like, is this a teaching moment or not? I'm not very good at letting those go. That doesn't always go down so well because sometimes the person is not in a place where they're able to hear it. But usually I've said it. And I think even if they can't cope in the moment, that hopefully they'll go and reflect afterwards.
Yeah. Nice.
Someone's got to break the ground.
Ginny, do you have anything to add before I?
Oh no, I guess I always think about what you walk past is what you accept. So if you can't just let things lie, and if you do see something, call it out. And I think it's all of our responsibility because if you don't do it, who else is going to do it? We're all in positions that we need to to be honest with others. Yeah.
Natalie, I'm sure you've got a.
I have two examples from the last week. Well, I work in women, and women is a target market, which makes me very easy pickings for people who want me to further my cause, by speaking for free at things. And I am very comfortable with money not being the only return exchange of value. But last week I was asked for the third time, after politely declining twice, to go and do something that was going to take 8 hours of my time for free. And the first time I was very polite when I responded and said this is sort of goes against the entire philosophy of Powrsuit. And this time I reinforced that, and I sent a very professional email. It was very professional and polite because I'm super anti-cancel culture. I'm like not a fan. I feel like we should try and bring things together, and just reiterated my position and said, I'm actually really surprised that even after I've said no a couple of times and after you have actively not given us what we asked for in return, you're asking me again. It didn't necessarily serve me. I know that means that, you're going to get a reputation for being difficult, but I just think it's really important. The second example, actually it wasn't in the last week, it was a while ago. I believe one of the greatest things about starting a business and a brand is about what you stand for and what you stand against. And during the Olympics, I don't know if you heard the huge controversy over a boxer who was claimed to be transgender when she was in fact not. There was a huge amount of misinformation, but regardless, that outcry, I felt Powrsuit should take a stance on it. And again, very professional, did a post about it on Instagram, and lost a member. But I think that's really, really critical. I think we play those roles, and I think these, like you both pointed out, are really simple examples of small, tangible things that you can do that, I don't know, they may not serve you, they may, I don't think it really matters. I think it is just a matter of, I can't live with myself. I'm like you, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do it.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, Ginny, moving to you. What can individuals do to exhibit leadership within an organisation when they may not have the title? So what's sort of a practical way you can show your influence or leadership?
Okay, so yeah, I guess, I work in it's a relatively small team, and it is very top heavy, I think. So I know there's a lot of people underneath me that have this struggle, and I talk to people about this all the time because they're always asking, well, no one's ever leaving this place, how am I going to move up? And so we have this conversation quite a lot. I think there are things that you just need to look at is think about not just, you obviously got good technical expertise, but what else can you do around you that, it might just set you apart. So for example, I had a very strong interest in culture and people and driving that forward. So I just took on a little project, and then that just bloomed and got bigger and bigger. And in the end, I've sort of became the culture champion for our division. So you sort of think, right, what's a little project that I could do? It doesn't have to be, I don't know, something to do with the RBNZ. It doesn't have to be that, sort of significant, but it's just something else that you could point to that exposes you to more people, and that they can sort of understand that you've got more to offer than just your technical expertise. Because I think we all think, oh, I'll do a good job and put my head down and everyone will notice me, and it doesn't always work out like that. Also, it's about, I think, Juliet, you said before about putting your hand up. So I actually want to travel overseas. I actually want to look for different roles. So if something comes up, they remember that you were the person who, I actually thought, I thought of you and tapped you on the shoulder, because all my roles, I've only had one where I've actually had to apply for a job, is someone's tapped me on the shoulder, because they know you're looking, they know you want to do something else. So I think you just got to, have a view, sort of, don't be shy, have a view and challenge others as well, because they have to understand who you are and what you stand for as well.
I think it's that, don't always think just because you're doing great work and you've got great output that people will necessarily notice or recognise that. You've just got to be a little bit more.
Can I have got a thought on that as well? Just something I've been looking at recently with an organisation around, I suppose, the power of sideways moves.
Mm-hmm.
So, which, where you can learn a whole different skill set and then kind of broaden out your options, because I think you were right. It's quite a small market, you're not that many organisations, so people don't move around as much as they might in bigger countries, but you can learn a whole new skill set if you do that. And then thinking about the leadership and I hate the word softer skills, but those human skills and building on those as well, which often women have got in spades, and so is a real strength if you can find a way to show that.
Yeah. And so don't always feel terrible about moving sideways if you are going to pick up another skill that may help you sort of climb further upwards. One of the things that I always sort of reflect on, and I'll sort of ask everyone's opinion, is for a period I was working in Westpac's financial markets in the dealing room, and then I moved into a relationship role, and at that time my eldest child, I think, was about 2 or 3, and really I was ready to have another child, and then I decided that I couldn't possibly, because how could I take a new role and have a child straight away, and that would be terrible. But when I think back, I just can't even believe I thought that, and no one would have cared. And so I'm kind of interested if you guys ever made some kind of terrible decision based on what you thought was the normal, what was acceptable generally by your male bosses, that you sort of regret now.
I mean, I think I had my little Kahui kind of collective of women friends who, when I'm having those kind of thoughts, they go to and they kind of, beat it out of me, saying, don't be ridiculous, of course you can do that. And so I probably played that role as well. So I had a friend who, she's an amazing doctor. She's got this particular opportunity because she's joined a new organisation and the boss is gone. And it's like, why don't you go for that? She's like, I've got 4 kids. It's like, well, why don't you go for that? So I think it's, you might. So no, I think, I suppose it's understanding when it's self-talk or when it's a real issue. And I think often the line's actually much further across than you think if you sit there and break it down and go and talk to your best girlfriends about that. Also, my husband's been an amazing support too. He'll be like, of course you can do that. You'll rock it like everything else. But yeah, so it's just, I think, finding that support and stopping the self-talk.
Yeah. And sort of the mention of sort of male allyship sort of brings me to my next question for you, Natalie. What was sort of interesting, and it was mentioned in the opening today, was just that concept of male allyship, and it's something that you do at Powrsuit. So how did that come about, and how are people men kind of come in and embrace that? Has that been a hard sell?
No, it hasn't. So I think sometimes this whole, and congratulations and thank you so much for the men in the room, because I know we probably all know how scary it can be to be one of the few in the room, and I really love to applaud men who turn up to these things, because I think often you end up becoming the kicking you when you turn up. But what we found really early on is, and we should all know this, is that it's actually not men versus women. It never has been. It's all of us versus the patriarchy. And when my sister had her first baby, I was really shocked to find out, I'd never seen this before, that there were no baby changing tables in men's bathrooms. And my co-founder at Hatch was a really engaged father. And he's like, where do I go to hang out with my group? There's mothers groups everywhere and I don't get one. So I think as long as we can start to frame this conversation as all of us trying to improve systems that were designed basically when one parent stayed at home and one parent went to work before all of us really entered the workforce. So like, this is not about us competing with each other. So that was sort of our fundamental philosophy. And then when I talk about solving problems, the first problem we came up against when we started talking about Powrsuit, and we did hundreds of hours of research and pitching it to different people and different concepts. And the first challenge we got for a while was, what about the men? And that was really hard for us to kind of counter, because we were like, well, we're trying to solve the gender leadership gap, and it feels like intuitively that would mean we are focusing on helping women progress. But then we got curious and went, well, what does that look like? Because we all have a role in this. So we, like we always do, just went, okay, well, we'll start an allies group and let's see what happens. And so we decided to launch that, which effectively means a one-page landing page on a website, and see what happens. And what we found is actually incredibly delightful. We have about 45 men in our allies group, and one of my favorite video calls ever was our first one. And basically what we do is once a month, it's very low key, once a month they turn up live or on demand, like everything with Powrsuit, and we interview an incredible leader about their story, about what they've learned about the gender leadership gap, about inclusive leadership, about the mistakes they've made. We're very much raw and real, and mistakes are great and celebrated, and trying to build trust with this group. And one of the guys was sitting with his fluoro vest in his truck with his phone up watching, and that to me just personified how we can all band together to do this stuff as long as we stop using the us versus them language. And what we found is actually that group needed a lot more trust building. Like, I do think sometimes that it is quite hard, I think, for men to join in this. And our first interview was with someone who'd put his hand up to go on a diversity board and kind of got publicly slammed for taking a woman's space. And I felt like, well, what's the answer then? If we're not going to include people, how do we change this? So he talked a lot about that, and for us it kind of feels really natural. Like, there's a lot to do with that group. Like, we've left it we're trying to form it with that group. We find a lot of our organisation partners, a few men put their hand up and jump in. I had a very excited man on LinkedIn contact me a while ago going, I've just found you, I'm signing up. And for us, that's about building that trust with that group to say, this is actually a safe space to go, if you actually do want to know why it isn't the best person for the job, or why, all of those questions, let's actually just have those conversations. Because one thing I know for sure is if we're not having them together, they are still happening. It's just that we're not having them as a group. So for us, it was a no-brainer, and it's been a very early stage, but it's one of the things I'm most proud of. I think it's fabulous, that group of people, very brave.
Yeah, love it, love it. Juliet, how do you see traditional views of leadership evolving, and what qualities do you believe will define future leaders?
But I actually think that the human skills that many women have are coming to the fore, and so I think we're seeing just generally, not just in leadership, but generally organisations caring more about, this is a more integrated, holistic proposition, whether that's sustainability, gender balance, ethnic balance. I feel that those things are despite the really terrible decision last night for our American friends, I think there's still hope. There's a big chunk of people who want the world to be different. So I feel like we've made a lot of progress, and then maybe some backward steps and then some forward ones again. And I think we're seeing that in New Zealand as well, with some of the, obviously for Te Ao Māori at the moment, it's a very difficult time. That the allyship is a real need, in the same way as you were discussing too, is actually how do we do this together for the country. You know, I want to take that leadership. I challenge everyone in the room to take that leadership too, and to you know, I try to have the grace. I know whether that's, you know, having a crack at a karakia or you know, standing up and saying something. But like I'm wanting to encourage, I suppose, that too. So I think that there's a more receptive, just more receptiveness just generally in the leadership to those things, and understanding that we're not kind of fully formed in its earnings. So that seems to me, you know, the last decade we've really seen a lot of advancement in that space.
Yeah.
So even if there are, you know, kind of things that might halt the progress or slow it down a bit, I think that there's a lot of steam there, and we're going to see more rounded leaders just generally. So, you know, be a part of it.
Yeah. Right, now I think we need to start moving to questions from the room now.
I'm interested in your point about thinking, oh, no one will comment on me having a baby after this job, when I literally heard that at a law firm I worked at. I can't believe she's just made partner and going off and having a baby. You know, that wasn't that long ago that was said. What are your thoughts around staying within organisations that have those issues and being an agent of change versus walking away and finding an organisation where you are aligned from a values perspective?
Who wants to start with that one? Juliet?
Yeah, I can do that. I think it depends on where you're at and how much you're up for the fight. And I think there are different kind of parts in your life where you'll be able to cope with that more. And I've definitely done both internal and the external. Sometimes you just want to be somewhere where actually your fabulousness can be really celebrated, and where you don't have to do the, I think, push the boundaries. But and even when I've decided actually maybe it's time to leave this particular organisation, you know, when I left one of the law firms, I had those kind of comments as well. And you know, it's like taking aside the employment partner on the board to say, do you realise that this is leading you to losing really great people? And one of the factors for leaving is actually the attitude that's coming through. So I think it depends on where you're at. We definitely need people inside bringing the change, and people outside bringing the change. So, you know, there's a role to play no matter where, but you've got to think about how much resilience do you have, how much do you, you know, want to take that forward versus when it becomes too much.
Yeah, so it's a balance, really, you're saying. Anyone else got anything to add to that?
So something that really resonated with me is when you ladies talked about the fact that sometimes you are the mouthpiece, I suppose, that has to speak up or call out some difficult situations, and we kind of had a chuckle because that's pretty much what I do, and always, and I'm South African, so it doesn't have either, but I've heard like quality insurance teams, heads of clients, all that kind of laughing, and sometimes you go into it thinking that you do it because everyone's actually deal with it. But then you realise when you're deep into it that actually there's a whole lot of knives coming at you. So I suppose my question is, how have you guys dealt with that, and like covered some of the techniques or tools or tricks that you've done?
I think Juliet mentioned this before. We call it a professional board of directors, and that is your group of people, your sounding board, your advocate, your team effectively. And they can be people from all parts of your life that you really back that they have your best interest at heart. And those are the people you go to in those times, because that's where you can let it all out and know that they will give you firm but fair advice and encouragement based on your best interests rather than theirs. So I think that's one tactic. The other tactic, and this is something we actually talked about in a recent mini masterclass, is that conflict thing of how do you, and we're all very much about self-leadership, this idea of how do you influence, how do you lead yourself. You can't control everything, but there's often more that you can control than you realise. And I feel like in those situations, there is always an opportunity to start with having conversations, like to say, what does success look like for you? What is our goal in this? And to really try and get your point across. And then I agree with you. And if all else fails, like, you got two options: you speak or you walk. And I think both of them are equally valuable. Like I've left a situation before where my values just didn't align, and it's like, what's the point of staying here? So and also I think you can say a professional no halfway through. Like if you're halfway through something and it's just not working, You are allowed to quit. You are allowed to say, this is no longer working for me, can I bow out of this thing? It's hard to do, but your mental health is far more valuable than the project, whatever it may be.
There's a big range of people in this room, but I'm sort of at the more mature end of my career, and I sometimes am disappointed at the aspiration of younger women who are totally justifiably making decisions not to take leadership roles, and I'm disappointed with myself that I am not inspiring them to wish to do it. And I just wondered, I think I'm losing I've lost, but I'm wondering if you have any comments on that, and not for me, but for those women for those younger women who are making decisions about whether to go for your job, Juliet.
Okay, so I've got the microphone. I actually, most people in the room might know Antonia Watson, who's our CEO, and she's just fabulous. And I remember quite a few years ago, she was speaking to a room of, senior females at ANZ, and she was saying, it is so good to be leader. And she goes, you don't realise you get to make all these decisions, you get to delegate to others, and she was basically saying all these things that you get to do. And I think it was such a positive way of looking at it, because you sort of look at the leadership and go, oh, it's such hard work and I've got to do this and that. And she just, completely reframed it for all of us, and really sort of sold the fact that, this is actually an amazing position to be in, because you get to make the decisions. You decide what happens. You back yourself, obviously, to make the right decisions, but it is such a privileged position to be in, and an exciting position. You can delegate the stuff that you don't want to do to other people. And, so I think she really reframed it for a lot of us, that it is actually fun, obviously not fun all the time, but there was that element of, this is a really, awesome position to be in, which I always remember. And I also think that it looks, I guess before you step into the role, it might look daunting, it might look like a huge amount more work, but you just get on and make it work. I mean, it's like anything, it's like, oh God, I can't play tennis, but you just got to go in and try, I mean, people always think before you go to something, I couldn't possibly do that, but you just have to get into that position, and you will make it work.
What is the worst that can happen? You fail. But if you don't try, what is that basketball quote? You miss every shot that you don't try. Well, I think there's a better basketball way to say it. But you get the gist. And the other thing that I think is, I've enjoyed the most is I don't think you realise when you become a woman leader, and especially in sort of more male-dominated areas where many of you probably work, is that the younger women really love having a woman that is their friend, that they know rise to that position. It's sort of something I hadn't really thought about it till sort of others had said it to me. So I think, don't underestimate sort of that path that does give people, the energy and the ambition, and like, actually it's my friend now that is the boss rather than Mark. Yeah, John.
Can I quickly add to that before the next question? Because I think one of the things we can accidentally do is blame women in our confidence for not wanting to get into leadership. It feels like a really, imposter syndrome, all of that sort of stuff. The equation looks different. The equation is different. You're balancing often the juggle. We've talked about that a lot today. You will need to find a different way of doing your job than the people who are role modeling that job. That is a fact. Most likely, unless you have a really, really equitable situation at home, you will have different barriers crop up. You will be told, why did you go and have children after you did this? Or all of those sorts of things happen. They factually happen. And for me, the reason why we started Powrsuit is to say we need a playbook for that. Because when we first started doing research, we were like, let's get more women into senior leadership. And immediately every woman we interviewed virtually said, I want that. It's too hard. I have to sacrifice too much to get there. So from our perspective, almost to add to what you heard, is if we have a playbook for navigating the workforce on our terms, the equation changes. It changes to much more of I can do this, and I can see how I can juggle, and I can see how I can go and have children and come back, and I can see how I can tackle that comment from that person and walk away feeling really good about myself. So there is actually a way you can change that equation and make it feel more attractive. And it's just a matter of like recognizing that it is a little, the way you have to lead is going to be a little bit different.
I'm going to try and explain my question. It's a bit confused in my head, but as a young female leader, I feel sometimes it's really hard to stop caring about what people think of you. And to know that to be a strong leader, you've got to be honest and fight for things. How do you balance that caring what people think of you and going, I don't care, I need to do me?
I think if you always take the decision or say the thing that's really authentic to you, then you can feel good no matter what people think about it. Everyone's not going to like you. I don't know if that gets easier, you just get more used to it. So, I think, oh, should I make a LinkedIn post about this thing that's, and then I'm like, well, hang on, what's the objective of this? Okay, education, yes, I'm going to do it, even if I get, a bit of flack and, like, just, be authentic and, it gets easier.
And I think just remember, you always get over it. Like, in the moment you think it's the worst thing that's happened to you and you replay the conversation, but you get over it. It just might take a day or two. Now, over to here.
Sometimes, listening to this, there's a couple of things that is going off in my head, and I think it's the way we define leadership as well. Leadership doesn't always mean being seen as a boss. And I think, if I think back also, being in corporate world for quite a few years, previously, the question was never whether we wanted it or not. It wasn't available. Whether we wanted it or not, it wasn't available. I think the conversation has moved now where women have got the choice and are opting out. So our challenge is how do we make it more interesting and actually understand that yes, you can do it, so it becomes a proactive choice. Which also goes back to another thing I was reflecting on in the conversation. Is it time that we also start thinking about the way we change our conversations? Because as women, we're sitting here and we're talking about how difficult it is to have kids. Well, men have kids. Nobody's asking how difficult it is to have kids and still go to work. Why do we still have those conversations as women? It's like, how do we balance our lives, in terms of the demands at home and the demands at work, when men are actually in the same position? So I think sometimes we need to reframe our own conversations and things that the way we look at it to make sure that yes, it is still a challenge. Yes, there's a patriarchy that we are fighting against, but we're not perpetuating that patriarchy in our own thinking. That's just,
Right.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, my husband's doing more of the children and stuff at home. And that has been the case pretty early on. I think I realised we were going to have to solve that issue and share it when we, both in really big jobs. And that was, different than some of my friends as well. For one friend who kind of, I think, took a step back and her husband's job was given more credence and she, ended up with 90% of the childcare and kind of home stuff. And so my counsel to her is just start like trying to move that, shift that kind of balance. But yeah, that's certainly my ability to have taken some of the jumps that I have been as a result of having more balance at home.
Well, question to Juliet, in terms of representation, has that ever been a problem for you and how did you overcome that?
Yeah. Yes. I think the bigger challenge for me has been, I think, being Māori and being women. And I think that's, I don't know, didn't realise that might be shocking for some of my colleagues in my last organisation, the RBNZ. I said that one of our International Women's Day conversations, and afterwards had one of my peers come up to say I never really thought that would be the case. I think, yes, there's the patriarchy, there's also I think discrimination built into many of our systems, our organisations here. So yes, I've often been the only woman, I've often been the only Māori woman. So I think that, intersectionality is a real thing and we need to solve both. And so I think generally try to talk about both things as well. In these, I think we've got more work to do in that space, and it's interesting because the demographics of the country are changing quite significantly. You've seen the census, it's quite amazing. Also, fastest growing parts of the population, Māori, Pacifica, ethnic diversity. So the country is changing, So I hope that that will also help to push things along.
You talked about in leadership having a small group of people and then growing as a leader and maybe managing 40 or so people. And having those people, when you delegate your tasks and you've got those people who are critical to getting the job done, and those people that you trust, that you can kind of delegate that work and know that it's going to get done. What if those people aren't part of your circle or they don't get that work done and it starts going badly? How do you pull that back and create a working environment where you can motivate those people to do the right thing?
Yeah. That's a big question, right? So I think it comes back to the why as well. So you've got to bring people back to say, what's our purpose? Why are we doing this? And really try and drive their behaviours. So I think it comes down to, if they weren't doing it, most people are very good at their jobs. That's why they are where they are. They've got the technical skills somehow to be there in the first place. So then it's about how do you change behaviours and, motivate people. And a lot of the time it's really understanding what drives that person. So you've actually got to get one-on-one with people. You can't expect to run a team. Even though there's say 40 people, you actually have to know people individually and what drives them. So you do have to spend a lot of time one-on-one with people, and that's just part of the role as a leader, is to really know your people, to be able to get the best out of them. So it takes time and effort. If they're not performing, then you've got to sort of really work on it, and that is very time consuming, but it's that coaching, developing. Can they talk to someone else? Can they shadow someone else? Coming up with some ideas of if people in your team aren't quite getting there, trying to think of some real tangible things that will help drive them. But also it's just understanding, getting people, and it's come back to culture always, because I think it's why we all work together, helping others. Does that person look like they're struggling? Do they need help? It's comes back to how we treat each other, and then the why, like why are we all here, trying to give that motivation to people as well.
And I always say people are tricky. That's what I've learned to accept. Like, we're complex individuals, and it's just if you get comfortable with that people are tricky, and then you just got to try to work them out. On behalf of Infins and the Financial Services Council and Empower Women, thank you everyone here today and our panellists for sharing your career journey and sort of the practical planning. So I think that was the premise, and hopefully that came through. Like, we really wanted to make this a bit more practical. So hopefully that has sort of come through today with our conversation. So a big thank you to Kate Lane, who I can say doesn't normally cry. It normally is quite businesslike. And Minters for your excellent hospitality. As Tracey Cross mentioned earlier, Infins is delighted to collaborate with FSC and Empower Women on this series of events, this one being the first, the launch. Our next event in March next year is aimed at the decision makers in the C-suite and senior leadership teams, and will be focused on case studies from 3 leaders who will share their initiatives that have addressed structural obstacles that impact the recruitment and retention of women. Next week, invitations will be extended to the CEOs of our partner organisation to support and attend this event in March next year, and then we will go to our wider senior leadership members late November.